I greet you in the name of the one who created us all, and I bring you greetings from the 16th Street Baptist Church and all of Birmingham, Alabama. To Counselor Rose, and to the president of this wonderful school, and to our special guests and dignitaries, good morning. I'm honored to have received the invitation to come and speak with you this morning, and very grateful to be here. My visit has been perfect from the moment I stepped off of the plane to today, to right now. I wanted to let Counselor Rose know that I've really enjoyed working with her staff. You know, I was pleasantly surprised last week I had a birthday. And lo and behold, I got a call from her office, her staff wishing me happy birthday, Derek Richardson and those. And last year I had some tremendous medical challenges, so I am especially glad to have these birthdays. And so it meant a lot to get those birthday calls. So thank you very much. And again, I'm honored to be here to share with you what I remember about Dr. King, and to also look at his life and the legacy that he has left for us. We still have much work to do, as I'm sure the panel will attest to. I'd like to present to you in 3 stages, 3 parts. First, by beginning with the history of Birmingham and Dr. King coming to Birmingham. Also, my involvement in the things that happened during that time, and then sort of look at where we are right now, and to sort of end with the question, which I think you have raised, which is what now? Dr. King would have said, where do we go from here? But I think that question, either way that we state it, means pretty much the same to all of us. So I began this morning where I always began, and that is by reading an excerpt from the segregation laws of Birmingham, Alabama. This is where it started. I was 14 years old when Dr. King came to Birmingham, and this was what brought Dr. King to Birmingham. I'm reading from section 369, and it's called Separation of the Races. It shall be unlawful to conduct a restaurant or other place for the serving of food in the city, at which colored and white people are served in the same room, unless such white and colored persons are effectually separated by a solid partition extending from the floor upward to a distance of 7 feet or higher, and unless a separate entrance from the street is provided for each race, for each compartment. Birmingham, or most of Birmingham, enjoyed 90 years of legalized segregation. This was what brought Dr. King to Birmingham. My introduction to segregation came at a very early age. It started when my grandfather brought my grandmother to Birmingham from Clanton, Alabama. She was very ill, but hospitals in Birmingham did not take black patients. But my mother had endeared herself to several of the members of the white community in Birmingham, and so my grandmother was admitted to a hospital that's still open today. It's called Princeton Hospital. My grandmother was placed in the basement of Princeton Hospital. And as a 12-year-old, it became my duty to sit with my grandmother because my parents had to work. I had 4 brothers, 2 older, 2 younger, but my mother wanted me to stay with her mother. So I sat with my grandmother for 2 weeks until she died. We were never able to learn what was wrong with her. We were never given any type of real information about what was going on and why she died. In later years, much later, I would return to that hospital as a chaplain, and I would service the patients in that hospital, black and white, in a way that had not been done with my grandmother. In later years, I would also return to divinity school, for at that moment a burden had been placed on my heart, and I would spend the rest of my life looking for answers. So those answers would come in the form of divinity school and a return to that hospital. And I would challenge the leadership of that divinity school by asking the question, are we all reading the same Bible? My second introduction to integration came when I was in the 8th grade. I had the privilege of winning the Alabama citywide, countywide, and statewide spelling competition. One of my favorite movies these days is Akilah and the Bee. I got so excited when I saw that movie because I still have that old, worn spelling book that I had to memorize. It's probably 50 years old at least, but after winning the state competition, I was not allowed to go to the national competition because, once again, blacks were not permitted to be part of the national competition. And finally, a little bit later in high school, George Wallace made his famous stand in the doorway of the University of Alabama, declaring segregation forever. And so plans to attend the University of Alabama were also thwarted. Now, because of the segregated life that we all lived in Birmingham, I spent a lot of my time at church. My parents were very, very strict people. When I graduated from high school, I had never had a date. And when I went to my senior prom, I went to the senior prom with my date's father driving, and we were in the back seat, and I returned home the same way. So my father saw absolutely no purpose in dating for me at all. And I talk a lot about my father because he was so strong, but he was very much a disciplinarian and very rigid. But all of that discipline would serve well in the years to come. So I spent a lot of my time at church. And I just happened to be at church, when the mass meeting started. Now, 16th Street Baptist Church was the very first black church built in Birmingham, Alabama. And it had a history all its own before the bombing. You know about it because of the bombing that occurred in 1963. But this church had its own history long before the bombing. It was built by people less than 50 years out of slavery at a cost of something like $36,000. And anybody who was anybody, as we would say, when they came to Birmingham, they came to the 16th Street Baptist Church. Names you would recognize would be people like Adam Clayton Powell, Thurgood Marshall, Mordecai Johnson, Mary McLeod Bethune, and in more recent years, people like President Jimmy Carter, Hillary Clinton, Marion Wright Edelman, and even Senator Barack Obama before he became President Obama. He was in our city one week and had 15 minutes, and they called and said the senator wants to know if he can just sit in the sanctuary. And we made it so. We gave him the space and the privacy to just sit in the sanctuary. And no doubt he was reflecting over all that had happened in the city. Well, because of this great history that the church had, and because there was always activity, I became our little Sunday school secretary when I was about 12 years old, and my job was counting money and recording attendance and greeting our guests, and I really enjoyed meeting the people. And someone discovered that I was very comfortable meeting people, and so I sort of became ambassador at a very young age in the name of our church. So I just happened to be at the church when the mass meeting started. On this one day, when they had the very first meeting, I was working in the back, and I heard singing. And it was not singing that I'd ever heard before in our church. And when I came to the door and peeped out, the church was completely full. Back in the day, we would tell people the church held about 1,800 people, it had about 1,800 seats, yeah. And so today we say about 1,600 seats because we moved some of the pews out. But every single pew was filled, and the balcony was completely filled, and there were people standing. And what was the most exciting part about all of this is that the people in the audience looked like me. I was 14 years old, and some of them were much younger, and some of them were much older. But there was such an air of excitement. So I ran in the back and put all of my things away and locked the door. And I came out and took a seat on the right side of the sanctuary along with the other students. And as I looked toward the pulpit, there were 6 men in the pulpit. Those 6 men were Dr. Martin Luther King, of course, Reverend Ralph Abernathy, Reverend Andrew Young, Reverend James Bevel, Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, and Reverend Jesse Jackson. I've had the privilege for the last 10 years of sitting at the feet of Reverend Shuttlesworth. He is still living, about 85 years old. We recently named our airport in Birmingham the Birmingham Shuttlesworth International Airport. Reverend Shuttlesworth had been working in Birmingham approximately 10 years before Dr. King came. He had challenged the laws of segregation in Birmingham, had been beaten and had his home bombed twice. On one occasion, when they bombed his church and his home, he told me that he and his wife woke up in the middle of the night and they were looking at stars in the skies. The bomb had completely destroyed the home, but not a scratch on he and his wife. And he felt that the message to him was, stay the course, continue to fight, and through this I'm showing you that I will protect you. So Reverend Shuttlesworth was working 10 years before Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King came. When Shuttlesworth marched, we were already 10 years past the Brown versus Board of Education decision. But Birmingham was determined that nothing was going to change, regardless of Supreme Court decisions or anything else. So Shuttlesworth invited Dr. King to come to Birmingham. He felt that with King's name, the city would get the national attention that it deserved. And when Dr. King came to Birmingham, immediately everything changed. So here we were at this point in the church with these 6 men seated across the pulpit, and one by one they began to give instruction. The first lesson came on nonviolence, and we were told, given a great detailed explanation of nonviolence and the philosophy behind nonviolence, and we were also told if you don't think that you can be nonviolent, perhaps this isn't where you ought to be. Then we had someone to come and tell us about what we might expect from the police, and they said the police might hit you, they may spit on you, they'll have billy clubs, they'll have dogs. What they didn't tell us was that they would have little white tanks, army tanks, and that they would have powerful water hoses. But once again, when you're confronted, if you don't think that you can be nonviolent, represent us in a manner befitting the movement, then it's going to be good for you to serve in a different way. And then we had someone to come and collect weapons, or not that anyone had weapons, but anything that might be conceived as a weapon, a pencil, nail file, anything. And we ended with prayer, and we ended with songs of the movement. No doubt you've heard them, Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around, Woke Up This Morning With My Mind on Freedom, and so forth. When we left, we were told that we would know when it was time to march. That we would know came the very next day. Someone showed up at my high school with a big poster board, and the poster board said, "It's time." And so students all over Birmingham marched, walked out of their high schools, and many out of elementary schools. The records tell us that over 5,000 children marched all over Birmingham and went to jail. The records also tell us that they ranged in ages from about 8 years old to 80 years old, though there was one 4-year-old who was among those that was arrested. We then heard a message on television from our president. In the weeks to come, President John F. Kennedy watched from Washington, and we soon got a message that challenged America to take a real look at the documents it had put in place for its citizens and to decide if those documents were going to be honored for everyone or everyone except people of color. With that Supreme Court decision, the people of color in Birmingham rallied and prayed and gave thanks and were ecstatic. We are moving on, they thought. But a little better than 3 weeks after that, the Supreme Court decision, came the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. What you have to understand is that this was not the first bombing in Birmingham, and it was not the only bombing in Birmingham. Bombing was a way of life in Birmingham. On any given day, we could be sitting on our porch or playing in our yard as children, and we would hear that sound. We had come to know the sound of the bomb. And when we heard that sound, an immediate reverence of sorts would come over us, and we'd all go sit on the porch because we knew within a few moments we would hear the phone ring. And the caller on the other end would say, "They just bombed Attorney Arthur Shore's home." Or they might say they just bombed the A.G. Gaston Motel. And so then we would wait for later reports to see if anyone was hurt and to hear about the extent of the damage. So bombing started in Birmingham in 1948. They started because of someone buying a house that crossed the imaginary dividing line of boundaries of the white and the black neighborhoods. But then after nothing was done about that particular bombing, they continued. So somewhere in the 60s, we had over 80 unsolved bombings. It was a way of life. And when people would come and try to talk to us after 9/11 about terrorism, certainly not to minimize anything that happened on 9/11 or the pain that was felt, but we said terrorism didn't start on 9/11.